I'm thinking of just walking through from main activity. Well, actually, we should walk it from the manifest file. That's usually a good place to start. So we'll start from the manifest file. Which bring us back to main activity. So there are a few components that we're using for the launch-in application. We have the main activity, which allow you to do your settings and also show you your statistics. And then we have the launch out UI receiver, which basically is when there's the Wi-Fi module detect that you have been disconnected, it calls back into the UI to give you the notification. And then there's also a notification receiver and then the launch-in UI receiver. We'll just walk through the code one at a time to see what's happening. So let's do the main activity. Brenda, do you want to talk?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, let me crank up the volume a little bit more, but yeah.
Is that better?
I just need to crank up on my end on my computer, so yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, so on activity, I can't really look right now what I'm doing.
But, you can just tell us high level how you organize
to do it
things.
From memory here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the main activity has the controls the fragments for the view pager, and that is the content that we see on each one of those tabs. And so we can either swipe back and forth, or we can touch the tab to switch fragments. And yeah, so that's basically what we're looking at there.
Of course, that's the whole point here.
And what these fragments are used for is like when you have a phone or have a tablet and you'll have like two screens, and then a phone you would just have one fragment, and this makes sense to have fragments, but I guess I'm not sure.
So that's kind of how the history of fragments. That's how fragment was first used.
Okay.
So Google introduced the notion of fragments when they started to have tablets, and then they realized that, for example, if you're in the Gmail app, if you're on a tablet, you have actually a lot of room. So you could have on the side the list, and then the main pane being the actual email. But on the phone, there's no room to do that. So they want to be able to reuse that list component. So that's why they have fragments. And in that particular case, the list fragments on the side, and then the detailed fragment.
Right. I had to do more on that.
Right. So that's how fragment got started, and then Google started using it in other things. So if you remember how the app looks like, or I can just bring it up.
So I was just really surprised when I saw it, just because.
So that's another use of fragment. Exactly. So view pages another way, which is kind of the same idea that you have multiple components that are inside an activity. So those are fragments. And then it's also very common to use fragments for navigation drawer. A lot of the apps that, put down my cookie. Let me see if I can show. So in Gmail, for example, you see how this come out, that this is a fragment. And each of the items that you tap on, so if I switch from my inbox to my start mail, this load up a different fragment. So it's like one activity, but they have multiple fragments.
Yeah.
So
it didn't make sense. It just was.
Yeah. So that's not the only way you use fragment. I think maybe the way they present it sound like this is why you have fragments.
Yeah.
But
I was surprised the first.
Yeah. So since then,
intimidated about adding stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, fragment is pretty much like it's like an activity, except it can be contained in another activity. That's all that is. Of course, there's a lot more complication as you go deeper, because the way the fragment backstack is managed, how does it get added to the activity and removed and things like that. But like at the basis of it, it's just a sub-activity pretty much. Things that you can put into a module and then reuse.
And you did that for all our dialogue, the dialogue fragments. You told us about that when we were making the screens with the buttons.
Yeah, so the dialog fragment is kind of another interesting thing, which before that exists fragments, the dialog is something that you attach directly to the activity. And then when Google came up with fragments, they're like, hey, this dialog thing is kind of like a fragment in the sense it's a part of an activity that you can reuse, right? You can use the same fragment in multiple activities, like supposedly. If you have, for example, a fragment that brings up a box for you to enter some text, you can imagine that being reused in a different activity. So then they change their mind and say, okay, now the best practice is to do it in a dialog fragment. And then they have a specific subclass of fragment that's called dialog fragment that handles when things get dismissed and things like that, which normal fragments don't have a notion of being dismissed, whereas a dialog does. So yeah, that's another confusion that, yes, and that's another place where fragments get used. But yeah, good question though, because sometimes, I don't know, I've done Android for so long that I forgot how confusing. I mean, I am still confused about fragments, but at least I stay within the part of fragments that I am familiar with. Yeah. So we have a view pager and we have.
I think what I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that what makes fragments so confusing is that you wanna think of them as like little activities, and they are, except for the life cycle is not quite the same. It's almost the same, but not quite. And then, you can't really do, or you shouldn't, control other fragments and talk to other fragments directly from a fragment. That you should talk to your controlling activity to talk to other fragments.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think that's where, for me, it gets weird and kind of tricky.
Well, yeah, like this week they said that you can kill your activity and keep your fragments alive.
Yes.
Too.
Yes. Yeah, that is possible.
Yes, which then you need to make sure, like, if you have any pieces in your fragment that are, like, directly referencing the activity by name,
Leak.
dot something, calculator exception, like, always you have to check to make sure your activity is
Yeah,
still
there are also
fragments.
invisible fragments. You can have a fragment that is not being presented. You're just using that to do logic. I don't do that. I mean, like I said, like I only use a subset of the fragment functionality because it is way too complicated than it needs to be sometimes. And yeah, there's a lot of concerns about fragments referring back to the activity, and then the activity is gone, and then it's null, or you're retaining some old instances, so things are not working properly. Yeah, actually, fragment is one of the topics that a lot of people want more information about, and there isn't a lot of information out there. It's just like you kind of hit on the one, you're like, oh, I have to remember not to do it this way because this is bad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not to scare you, but it is a very deep pool, like this fragment pool. And yeah, the example that they gave in class is the first use. There are many.
Right.
I'm pretty sure you can fill a book. Yeah, if someone wants to fill a book about fragments. Yeah, but so we have 3 fragments. So Brenda, you want to continue? Just kind of walk us through what each of them does and how they interact with the other parts of the app, like the settings and the statistics.
Yeah, so again, I apologize for not being super prepared. I'm actually in my car right now, so I can't look at what I had done.
Quiz. You have to remember what you did.
Yeah, I have to concentrate on driving and then also remember what I did. But
that is not good.
So so we had the settings fragment, we had the my goal, as well as the statistics fragment.
Right.
So I did a lot more work in the settings fragment than I did in 2, because Joan and Sepida did some of the work in the other 2. But for the my goal, it just took the settings preferences that was stored and displayed as like a reminder to the user, yes, this is the name of my goal. Here's how much I thought that it would cost to do that activity or buy that, whatever it was. And then there was a little bit of statistical type data to motivate you like chart that she will probably talk about later on there. And then the statistics fragment is more of the teaching piece, if we can consider it that, where it just sort of kind of brings to light like the worth or the value of that hard-earned dollar that you just tossed away for that McDonald's dollar menu hamburger or whatnot.
Right.
So, and then the settings is where the user sets their data, and that is stored using the settings API and the data object.
Cool.
There.
Yeah, so
that's all I've got.
Okay, that's fine. I think maybe we can have Jones explain how do you make the pie chart on the goals tab. Let me just bring up the My Goals fragment. We have a pie chart view. Let me open the code for it. Excuse me. Yeah, so maybe you can explain to us what's going on here in the pie chart view. How do you draw the pie chart, and how does that work? You forgot?
Exactly. Well, I created a new view just for the pie chart, and and then there's these to draw in the view, you use these a thing called paint objects, and you can set all the stuff like your color and your text. And like I have a set style paint with fill, so that you create Okay.
Yeah, maybe I can scroll down to the Ondraw function.
Now I remember.
Yeah, maybe it makes more sense to look at the Ondraw function because that's where those things are used.
Canvas, and the canvas is things you can draw 2D things in. And so what I did was I created a canvas, and in the middle of it, I just drew an arc, which is essentially drawing a circle that you declare how many degrees to do it.
So it's from 0 to 360, so it's a full
Right,
circle.
so I drew it once as a full circle, and then if the percentage was greater than 0, then I drew it in another color for that percentage.
Oh, cool, and you can just calculate the
Right,
angle.
and I can use the paint to tell it what color.
So this the background paint is the full circle, and
Right.
then the paint is the foreground.
Is the other-
That's the part that we're using to indicate how much you saved.
Right, and I actually just drew over the full circle. I didn't.
Right, that's no point because it's
Anyways, and then I created a rectangle so that I could put the text in there that said, how much we were
just a
saving.
legend essentially.
Yeah, right. You can in the canvas you can draw text too.
Right.
So that's all I.
Cool. Well, and then there's a set percentage function as well here.
Right.
So what happens
And
here?
well, I required you to send the percentage in, so then, so that I could make it into an angle. I multiplied it, the percentage times 360, and then I wanted it to be a fraction. So,
Right. So I think the important part of the set percentage is that you call invalidate, which will trigger the draw.
Right.
Yeah, so when it
That's
changes,
right.
someone else can call it, and then
Because if you don't call invalidate, it will internally have the new percentage
And
number.
I haven't
But
done any of this stuff, but this was, I've certainly done plenty of drawing.
which invalidation is kind of the same concept, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that's very easy to forget. That you do all these things and you're never asked the computer to redraw, and then nothing happens.
Or the redraw.
So when you call invalidate, then that actually calls like the system level Ondraw method, or does it call some other method? So like does that whole Ondraw re-execute when you do
Well, it says everything is dirty, so that I think that you'd have to redraw the whole screen.
Yeah, so you can also set a clip rectangle, which tells Android that only this part changed, and then it will be smart about not redrawing the whole thing. So in our case, for example, probably the label didn't change, so we probably could have clipped it to just the circle part, right? Because we don't have a function that says set legend, so it's always going to say savings.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
but I always said savings, but I also put the.
So, well, I guess, people on Hangout cannot see, but I will show.
I put savings, and then I drew a rectangle with what the color was.
Right. So, but when you set the percentage, right, this part on the side is not going to change. So we could potentially say, okay, the dirty part is just the circle part, and then the label part is not going to be needing any redrawing. And then if you mark the clip rectangle, so to tell Android that this part is dirty, then it will be smart about not bothering with redrawing the other part.
Yeah. It was pretty easy to, I was afraid that, the circle, I'm going to have to tell it how many pixels to the right or left. It wasn't actually that bad to set up.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just going to.
I kind of took this on because it was like I could do it by myself and not.
It was a good kind of component that you can work on. I'm going to just show how that is used in the app. So if I go to the fragment for the goal, here if I scroll down, this is where you're using it, right? So we have a view that is pointing to this pie chart view class.
Right.
So another way that we could declare is actually just put this whole long thing in, and instead of view here. So we could have done this instead, and then we don't need the class thing. It's just an alternative way. I usually do that just because there's one fewer line, but yeah. Anyway, that's why I want to point it out. So that's another way that you can do that. But you have to make sure that you put in the whole path. If you just say pie chart view, then it doesn't know where to look for this view. I mean, in fact, all these other views are just shorthands. So this is just shorthand for android.widget.text view. That's all there is. So I've seen people put their own class under the Android widget package name so that they can do it without all the all the prefixes. So just a little tip, but I've never done that. I like seeing my custom view having my package name so that I know that it's my own. Yeah, and other people exactly. Other people wouldn't go try to exactly like go on the internet and find this pie chart view. Well, there's no pie chart view because we made it. Yeah, cool. So I think this is a good change from the UI to like I'm going to talk about the API, how we retrieve all those statistics. Unless there's other parts of the UI that people want to talk about? No? Okay. So I'm going to go to the it's the lunch-in API that I want to talk about. So I can just show you how we are using it. So for example, in the MyGo fragment, we are using it to get the number of lunch-ins and the number of lunch outs so that we can show things like money sacrificed on lunch out, which is just taking the number of lunch outs and multiplying it by the average lunch cost, which touches two parts. So the number of lunches come from the API, but then the money average lunch cost actually came from the settings. And the reason why is because that the lunch-in API actually keep track of it in the database, so you can have multiple items of lunch-in and lunch-out records, whereas there's only one item for settings. So settings, we're using it as a key value store, whereas the lunch-in API is the one that connects to the database. Okay, so I'm going to go into this code, and the way I did it, I actually didn't do directly the MySQLite content provider kind of standard Android way, I use Cupboard, which is actually, oh, someone dropped, which is actually a library that uses SQLite in the underlying thing, but then I don't have to be very verbose about setting up the schema and things like that. So I took a shortcut. Probably will be interesting if you have not done the content provider thing to actually do that. I will just like, oh my god, the deadline's coming. I'm just going to take a shortcut. So the way I set it up is I use this Cupboard class, which the way this is initialized is in the database utility class. And this is how everything is set up. I define the database name, which essentially everything is stored in this luncheon.db file inside your app storage. And Cupboard is just an interface to read and write with this file. And the way this is declared is I will have a database, and then I will use it to store this class called meal item. And then the rest, the on create and on upgrade are pretty boilerplate. It just says that, oh, Cupboard, go create a table. And we are not doing any of the database upgrade yet, so I haven't touched that part. And the meal item is a Java object. What it stores is, so the IDs for the unique identifier for the database, and then I have a timestamp and a Boolean success. So essentially, when you get the notification that says that you lunch in, if you say yes, then it will store success is no because you failed to lunch in, and store the timestamp so that way we know which day that happened. That's kind of the high level of how this works. And then the actual storage happens on the API. So here I have all these functions. So let's see. So the set lunch in and set lunch out, which I call the create meal item. So what I do is I make a new item, and depending on the time, which is retrieved from the clock, I'll explain to you why there's this level of interaction later, because this is for testing actually. So I figure out what time is it now and get the number of milliseconds stored as a long, and then whether you eat in or eat out, and then just stick it in the database with the put function. And then when we need to display all the statistics, I call one of these functions. I'm going to just pick one of them, which is here, since I don't have to scroll. So get number of lunches this month. You can either specify success or not. So success is lunch ins and fail is lunch outs. It go ahead and talk to the database, and it says, hey database, I want to find the meal items where the timestamp is this value, the start and end value. So what it's doing is the start of the month. So this is this magic that says with day of month is 1 and with time of day as so you're taking today and then you say, okay, what is it that is the beginning of the month? So for us it will be July 1st at midnight. And then the end is that day plus a month. So for us will be August 1st. And then I said when it's greater than or equal to the beginning and strictly less than the end, that will be this month. And I also query it so that it's either the success or the failure you wanted. And then once I did that, I actually just go ahead and get a count. We can also step through if we want to display a log, if that's something that people are interested in. But at this point, we don't have any logs. We just have the aggregates. So for example, this number is shown on the statistics tab. And you have the two boxes that tell you how many times you have eaten in and eaten out. So a lot of the other functions are structured similarly. The query is different, basically. And the part I want to cover here is that, well, there are two things. So one is how it's used in the app. So we can, for example, see it in the stats fragment that we will have the lunch in API dot. So you see how we are retrieving the number of lunch ins and then setting it on the UI. The interesting part for me, at least, is the testing part, which I need to navigate to. What happened to my test? Okay, sorry. It's not under app. Yeah, that's one thing that I did in the beginning. I split everything up into very small libraries, thinking that it will be easier for us not to step on each other's toes. But at the end, I need to do a lot of refactoring just to make sure that I can bring in the right component to the app. So I think if we start a new app next time, I wouldn't bother with all these different libraries. I'll just dump everything into app. So even I was confused. So it's under the database module that I have to test. So here, this is an instrumentation test, which means that I will have access to all the Android classes. A lot of the tests are done in JUnit if you are doing just pure Java classes. But in this case, because I'm using the database and all the SQLite functionality, I needed to have access to all that. So the way this is happening is that I am going to interact with the Lunch API. So here, I create a Lunch API with a specific database name. Instead of the default one, which is lunchin.db, I have a different one so that I can go ahead and delete it every time I'm done with testing. So I always start afresh rather than having the app remember this previous stage, so that if I want to test, then I have to make sure that it's in the stage that I know. So the Lunchin API actually has two constructors, one of which takes a database name and one of which just uses the default. So the app uses the one that takes the default, and the test uses the one that I can supply this. And I also supply my own clock. So let me just jump in here. So normally, the app uses this one, which it will create a new clock, which is just a very thin wrapper that has one function that returns the current time with the Joda time library, because it's much easier that I can do things that I showed you earlier, like the start of the month, rather than like figure out the math myself. But the reason why this one simple line, I mean, I could just inline this, right? Why did I wrap it in this class? The reason why I did that is because in my test, instead of using the actual today time, I'm mocking it. So Mockito is a mocking library which can take a class and it can return functions independent of the actual what the class does. So what it does essentially is say, hey, I want to make a mock class that has the same interfaces as the clock class, which has only one function, has a getNow function.
So that's a Java thing?
Mockito is a Java library.
So you can't use Mockito on classes that you don't have control over?
Yeah, okay. You can mock pretty much anything except final classes, and also you cannot mock static things, because it's an object that basically essentially what it does is it creates a new object that then you can use Mockito to do things like this. It says whenever this function getNow is called on the clock, return this particular time. So I'm creating a known time. If this is our first meetup, I thought it's cute that I put now as our first meetup time. So now every time that we are running this app in the test environment, it will always have a predictable time rather than whenever now is. And
so you use the clock class because then you could specify like a specific method, whereas with datetime it was just the constructor. So
exactly.
You can't specify Mockito, when I call the constructor, do this instead?
Yeah, okay. I think so. I think Mockito doesn't allow you to mock the constructor.
Okay. In any case, it's more clear to a reader.
Yeah, maybe I should try that. I don't know what it will do. Like, how would you even call this when function if it's the constructor? Maybe there's a special keyword. Yeah. So for example here, what I did is the setup function is called before every test. So I'm just verifying the baseline. So it's like, well, if I have a fresh database, I should have no lunches at all, and I should not have eaten out today already because it's a fresh state. Right, so for example, I just go through one function. So here, I have this test lunch in function that says, hey, okay, now is the 10th, and then we are at 12:30, and I said call lunch in. So once I call lunch in, then the total number should increase by 1, the lunch in should increase by 1, but the lunch out should stay 0, right? And then I make it into the next day, and then I call this again, and then and then I verify the internal database, right? So this is much easier to test than me waiting for it to be tomorrow.
I was wondering how you were testing all this.
So I thought, I wouldn't have time for testing, but I just had no confidence whatsoever that the database was working. That's why I did all this setup to make sure that I can test these things. And then I'm testing lunch out, so I'm like changing the time and changing the date. So anyway, so you could go read the rest of the test cases, but they are structured very similarly as the one that I already walked through. Essentially, I change the time and I call some function and I verify that the functions are returning what I'm expecting them to return. So it gives me a certain confidence that this class is internally consistent, right? So now that then we can use it. We can use it wrongly, right? We could call set lunch in 10 times, right? It doesn't know that you can, a person only eat lunch once a day.
Well, could you eat lunch twice?
So right now the API allows that. So I could potentially, in the set lunch in function, instead of just blindly creating a new item, I could first verify that today, so I do the same trick, right? So from the start of the day to the end of the day, I try to retrieve a lunch in item or lunch out item. And if one is already there, then I don't allow you to create one. So right now, the database doesn't do that, right? But we could potentially change it so that it will be much more strict, that we only have one lunch in item. Part of the reason I didn't do that is because if we want to do dinner, we could potentially have 2 meal items. That's also why this is called meal item, not lunch item. So that's something I really want to go through because I thought it's not obvious what's happening here. Cool. So I'm tired of talking, so maybe Kelly can explain.
Hey, Kiki, that was really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Cool. Yeah. So maybe Kelly can show us the other part, the Wi-Fi part. I'll come back and talk about the settings part a little bit. The setting part is not much. Actually, I think maybe Brenda should talk about the setting part, about how she made the setting SS class. So if you want to drive, you
sure.
can. Yeah.
Right. So, just jump back into
It's another module probably.
the manifest really quick. So this is the lunch at receiver declared in the manifest, and you can see I have 4 different intent filters. So basically the receiver is, if this app is installed on your phone, even if you've never launched it before, the receiver will always be essentially listening for any of these things to change, and it'll do stuff in the background. So you could have never opened the app before, but you would get the notification. So these are the states I was talking about at the beginning of the meetup, where I wasn't quite sure. We initially were just using this one, Wi-Fi state changed, but that wasn't reliably triggering when you'd move from one network to another, but it always reliably triggered if you went completely off a Wi-Fi or your Wi-Fi turned off. So I added these 3 to get it to work all the time, but I'm not confident that I need all of this. So if we jump into lunch out detection lib, all right. So lunch out detection receiver. So basically then if any of those states in the manifest are fulfilled, then this onReceive method will execute. And then we want to make sure that you've set your work, because since this can go off before you've ever entered the app, you might not have any information about what your work Wi-Fi is or what your lunch time is or any of that. So we want to make sure that, and we need all this information to proceed, so we want to make sure that that's all there. And then this is some stuff right here, basically to sort of strip down the name of the Wi-Fi network so that we can use it. And then we also want to save off the current Wi-Fi name, and that's because when you change networks or when you go off Wi-Fi, it actually spits out multiple signals on receive gets called multiple times. And so you could end up having like 4 notifications of lunch out when you only needed 1. So basically, and then we have this method that we made. If it's now lunchtime, according to what you've set, and there's another method we've created. If you're away from your work Wi-Fi, then call on possible lunch out. And then here's.
So I have a question. So when you store the mCurrent SSID as a member variable, basically my question is, when is the receiver created and destroyed, right? Because if the receiver is no longer a memory, then that current SSID will
it go away?
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and I think this was something that I was confused about generally too.
Okay.
Like, what is the receiver? Like, if it's always running, like the on receive gets called, but like how about this receiver itself is always like running.
I guess we could figure that out by logging into constructor and just watching it, like install the app and see what it does.
And see, yeah.
I'm just wondering if you like played with that already.
I didn't. Mark did. Dug more into the current SSID code. Mark, do you have any?
My understanding is that the service runs unless the phone runs out of memory, which is pretty unlikely on modern phones. So
that it's stored on
the member variable isn't rock solid, but it works 99% of the time. And for it not to work, it would have to crap out right when you were getting multiple SSID reports, like around the time of lunch.
Yeah, I guess in our case it works because it's going to be coming in very quick succession, so the system probably hasn't killed off the receiver yet. It will be using the same one. Anyway, I just thought that may be something.
Yeah, the other thing is for the typical user who sets an hour lunch window, 23 hours of the day, it doesn't really matter what happens. It's really only crucial during that lunchtime because we filter out by time as well.
Right. Cool. Anyway, I just want to know how that works.
Yeah, that's a good.
The other thing that I think we should put on the task to do is, I initially thought about this, which is when you detected that the settings things were all empty, we could turn off this component, this receiver completely, so it doesn't get fired.
Let me save.
Yeah. And then the moment when the settings get saved, it can turn it back on. So that, I mean, I don't know how much battery it uses every time the Wi-Fi triggers, but we could at least turn that off when the app wasn't, someone downloaded the app, but they haven't given us the Wi-Fi for their office yet. So there's nothing we can do at that point.
Yep.
Yeah.
That idea.
Yeah. So, and then I think it's also a little fun thing to try because turning on and off components. So we could do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the way that I do the possible lunch out, I feel like it's kind of maybe not the best way. I feel like this is really like C++ of me.
All this C++.
So I call this method on possible lunch out, which is part of the lunch out detection receiver down here, but this is an abstract method.
Java
so it just doesn't
abstract.
Do anything. Okay,
Oh.
that's not like weird to do that way.
No.
Okay, so then if we go back to the app, because once you get to a possible lunch out, like the lunch out detection receiver's job is done because it's received information and now it knows it's officially a possible lunch out and it's like passing it off to the UI.
So my question is, do you need to do that because I made this structure so that it's in a different library? Maybe we didn't need that if we merge it back.
If we just put all of this code in.
Yeah, I'm put that as a task to actually merge everything back into an app, just because I'm hoping that other people besides us can study this and understand how things work. And I think it's just very confusing.
If it keeps going back and forth, yeah.
So I'm just going to merge libraries into app.
Yeah. So that was lunch out detection receiver was the library level, and then if we go over here to the inside the app, lunch out UI receiver extends from lunch out detection receiver. And then this class is really tiny. So you can see that on possible lunch out is actually getting implemented in here. And I'm calling Chuki's notification class, just show lunch out notification, and that's all it does here. And then from the we override the on receive method, and basically all it's doing is it's getting from the user settings, which we need in the main app. We can't access from the library. We're setting the start and end time of the lunch and the Wi-Fi ID, and then we're calling super on receive, so we're calling the parent on receive method, which is the lunch app detection
Why do
receiver.
you need to set the settings there?
Because we needed a way to pass the user's work Wi-Fi and lunch start and end time. Because when we're in the library, we don't have access to the
Yeah, so
settings.
probably, if we merge everything back to the app, then it will have.
Yep, if we merge everything back to the app, then lunch, app detection,
simpler.
receiver, it won't need to be, these bottom two won't need to be abstract, and then we don't need to, these lines can happen within the regular on receive.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that gives me even more reason to do it. I feel like there's artificial boundaries that makes things a little bit more clumsy. Well, I didn't know. I thought.
It was, and also it was good too to like really, I think to me, like enforce the idea of like how to like separate things out, and like I think if you don't always have access to all the UI stuff, it makes you think harder about like what do you really need to access anyway. Like keep it separate.
Makes it difficult.
Like the model view controller separation.
Is that having your tentacles?
Yeah, I'd be like, I can just put this and this. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And then there's the lunch in detection, which is alarm based thing.
Yeah, and Mark, do you want to talk about that? Because I didn't work on the lunch in.
Yeah, actually, I didn't end up finishing it. So
you want me to talk about it?
You already talked about it a little bit.
Well, can I ask about?
Yeah.
In my Java class, it says calling the super class of the subclass has to be the first line.
Yes, I think it depends on what class you're doing. So some things like in the view class, right? Like on create view, right? You always want to call that super class first, because it's doing important stuff that you need to have happen before you can proceed with the rest of your stuff. But in my situation, all my thing was doing was updating user settings.
It's the opposite, right?
It's
You are setting up
Yeah.
the environment for the super.
The parent class assumes that like the user settings have already been set, and so it goes on with its work, assuming like it looks for the Wi-Fi ID and all these things. And so I needed to tell my parent what those things were before I called it. So yeah, exactly.
It's not always the case.
But I feel like a lot of like the system level methods in Android, especially like in the beginning when you start Android development, they always call super first. But it's definitely not a hard rule. Yeah, and I could even do something like this. Then like after that all finishes, then
right. It's literally just a function call.
Like log something else. Yeah. Good question.
All right, so I guess I'll go over the lunch in detection. Where is this? I think it's in the lunch out detection lib, even though it's lunch in detection. Whatever. Okay. Right, so this part is, even though the name is kind of the same, it's completely different, because the way it works is that we want to know at the end of lunchtime whether you have eaten out or not. If you have not, then it will pop a notification and ask you, hey, did you go outside? Because you could have gone outside to eat and just forgot your phone at your office. It's totally possible. So the way it works is that it has, so this function right here is actually just an abstract class. It has a lot of static functions. So what this does is essentially a lot of helper functions for other people to call, for the app to call. So I have the set alarm function, which grab the settings and then see if there is a Wi-Fi ID. If it's not, then it doesn't bother firing because it doesn't know anything about anything. And then if it does, it go ahead and set up an alarm. So I think this is the most interesting part here. So it set an alarm which will wake up the device, meaning that if your I think it means when your phone, even when it's off, it will turn on. We may or may not want to do that in the real app that we launch on the App Store. But for the demo, this is like this is what I put in. And then what it does is basically saying that, okay, at the end of lunchtime, I will go ahead and call the intent, which is this pending intent function. So I'm going to jump right in. So the pending intent is going to essentially send an intent to whoever that's listening that is the receiver class. Basically, it's going to trigger the onReceive function on whatever receiver class that is going to be specified here. And the reason why we have that as a parameter rather than a hard-coded class is, again, because of the boundary. So I think once we merge everything back in, it should be much simpler. So it will go ahead and call this broadcast. And then we have an interval, which right now is set to a day. And the reason why I put it out into a variable is that when I was doing debugging, I was changing to minute. So it will ask me whether I stay in every minute. So I know that the alarm is working. But for the real app, I put it in a day. Right, so let's see how this set alarm function is called. Right, so I set alarm when the user changes the settings, essentially. So this is called at 3 places. I called it when the time change, so either the start time or the end time. I call it when the Wi-Fi name changes. And I also call it on boot. So the on boot case is kind of the simplest case. When your phone gets turned off, it forgets all its alarms. So when they turn back on, basically the on boot receiver, just every time the phone boots up, this receiver gets triggered, and the on receive function will run and say, oh, okay, I will go ahead and set the alarm. And like I said earlier, in the set alarm function, actually check whether there is something to do.
So on boot, if you turn off the phone, will you lose your start time and time?
No, because the setting is actually persistent. Okay. So it just forgot what time it should bring up the alarms.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one case, and then the other case is when you change the time for lunch, right? It will then reset the alarm. And the way and Android, the way it works is when you set an alarm. If the pending intent is identical, then it will override the previous one. So I didn't need to cancel the previous alarm because I have an identical intent, and I make sure it's identical by just having a function that I always call this function, and it has the same request code. So that's how that works. And then what happened when the alarm fire off is then I will have a lunch in detection receiver. What this does is it went and set up the database and the settings in the database, and then figure out which day of the week you're interested in tracking. So in the setting, it shows you Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can pick which days are the work days. And then it check the current time and make sure that today is a work day, essentially. So if today is a work day and you didn't eat out already, then it's very similar to the one that Kelly just showed. I also call an unpassable lunch in, which then calls the notification, which shows. Nice. That makes sense. The days of the week thing is kind of interesting. I can go through it quickly. It's a bit vector. So it is essentially storing the value 1 through 7 each independently by setting the bit on a binary number. I don't know, but do people know about bit vectors? Should I explain how that works? No? Yes? What does that mean? Should explain? Should not explain?
Should not.
Should not explain. Okay, should not explain. Well, the reason why I'm doing it is because I wanted to just save it as a... You know what it is. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I see. So Joanne and
Peter, yeah.
Everybody's double E in this room, so I don't need to explain. Because I know what it is. I'm not double E, but yeah, the double E is like, why do you even bother explaining such simple thing? Anyway, so the reason why I'm saving is a bit vector because I wanted to simplify things. I want it to be a single setting. Cool. So I just store an integer in the settings module rather than 7 things. And anyway, this is just the logic to translate day of the week into the bit vector and back. And so it's in the day of the week class, which I also have a test for. So let's take a look at day of the week test. So this one is a JUnit test. and it just goes through setting the bit vector and then asserting that which bits are set as what you expect, and then the toString function works.
Cool.
So I love testing. Like that's how I can make sure that things are working properly. So I wrote this class, and then I have this unit test to make sure that I know that it works, like it returns the correct strings. And the reason why there's a string to string function is because in the settings, it actually shows you on the settings page before you click onto the dialog, it shows you which day you have set. So it says Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, something like that. So I'm using that. And the strings are supplied to this class in the constructor. So
I have a question about testing.
Yeah.
So when you do a test, like a single test, like at test, but then you have multiple assert statements, like what is like the general thought process about like how many different types of things you're asserting within one test?
I generally do it like a user story, I guess, if you think of the agile way. It's like there's this task that people would like to do, and then I put it all in a single test, and then it will fail prematurely if the preconditions fail, right? So maybe you have a form that you need to put in like your name, and then you have to choose your date, your age range, and then you submit, right? So and then maybe I have the test that verify when you put it in the name, it will show what you typed in, and then if that failed, then I wouldn't bother going to check the age. I mean, some people are more like I should check them independently.
But you're more like user story. It's a cool way.
Yeah, and then I'll just have helper functions if like the beginning of it is the same. So I'm doing the same thing, I'm asserting the same thing. That's how I do it, just because I feel like then when that breaks, it directly mapped to like one specific thing that the user is interested in, rather than that, this field didn't get focus.
Cool. Okay.
So that's how I approach it. Other people are more purist. They like each test to test one thing. But usually when you do UI tests, it's much more difficult to just test one thing. There's a lot of setup going on. But for unit tests, maybe that will work better.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Brenda, are you there?
So I noticed that we were getting a lot of keys, and they were all very, very similarly named. And so that's why I decided to go with the approach to do an inner class and enum class, because I wanted it to be that if we changed our mind or we wanted to do it for dinner, that it would be very, very easy to make the change in one place, rather than, I'm sorry, I should be on the settings tab, to make the change in one place rather than have to go and change it in a bunch of different places. So that's why. And also I wanted it to be very hard to get the wrong key in this scenario. So I'm trying to zoom. There we go. So that's why I named it. I am still unsure about the name I actually gave the enum class resource. I originally picked it because these were all string resources, and then we changed the keys to be Java constants, which I am so sorry, Mark, that you lost time because I fumbled with the autocorrect and let it pick the wrong constants for some of these. So I really felt bad about that. I apologize.
No worries.
So here I also provided methods other than just get key. I originally thought that we would want the resource names, and then I was like, no, I just rather have the string text itself. So I don't think that the get title and the get description, where it actually gives back the resource integer, are even being used.
Well, it's not grayed out, so someone is using it.
Yeah, I guess. No, I'm using it in my description text. But otherwise, I mean, I think that it's basically just using these and then the get key. So that can be thrown away in the future if we find it to be unnecessary. I decided that in this particular scenario, because it is such a small app and it's not very resource intensive at all, that it would be okay to have the additional overhead of using enums versus just using, like Java constants. I thought that it would be worth the trade-off to make it harder for the API to be misused or to inadvertently get the wrong key. So then here we have the couple of methods here for get description. So I made there's this little, whoops, I didn't need that, it's typo. So that way you couldn't actually access the default constructor, because I only want you to access this one that takes arguments. So here, this creates globals to create the state for our setting object. And then once we've done that, we can call methods on that, get title, get description, which will provide you the description in a formatted way. Looks like this is the name and the cost for the goal. And that these are being primarily used for the settings fragment, where we see the list view, or it's not, actually it's a recycler view, showing the names. Oh, I think we lost Mark.
Yeah.
Showing the names and the descriptions. So that's what the get value is also used for the recycler view, so that way we can see what the set value is, even if it's actually going falling back to the default. And so if we look in the settings adapter, which, there we go, you can see where these methods are being, trying to zoom. There we go.
I could potentially see, but now I can see.
Right. So you can see where some of these methods are being called, like the get title text for the work Wi-Fi, etc. So the other piece to the settings is the settings access. So this is where we actually store the setting shared preferences data, and then we're able to read it. So here we have some default set for it to fall back to if there is no key that exists in the file. So shared preferences is really just a file, and it is a key value pair. So whatever you pass in for this first, for example, if I say set work Wi-Fi ID, and then I say put string, all I'm doing is the first parameter here, this first argument that I'm passing here is the key that I'm going to use to access that data later, and then this SSID is the value that's stored there. And then I call commit. So here when we say get work Wi-Fi ID, I'm saying get string this time instead of put string, and I'm asking for this same key. And here the second argument that I'm passing is whatever the default value is that I want to be returned if this key does not exist. And so for like the days to track, this is the get days to track. This is the default right here, this constant value. And so as you see, there's, for each one of the settings, we've got a getter and a setter, and it's all the same premise.
Yeah, I like that, how we can then put all the defaults hidden behind this. So when we are accessing it, we don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. Right, we don't need to know whether or not it's the default.
Right,
yeah. There is one area where we did need to know whether or not it was the default, and that was when we were explaining Gosh, it's the one where it's the gross annual salary. That's right. Let me see if I can find that.
Right, that's the one where the text show different message when it's the average versus something that you put in.
Right. Yeah. And I don't really remember where that is, and I don't want to waste a bunch of time digging for it. But basically, I did something, and I don't remember what it was, to know whether or not it was default. Let me see if I look in settings access. It might remind me. I think I'm passing something weird, like a negative.
About a little bit earlier, like there's I just saw it. It says default salary something. Yeah, earlier. Yeah, right there, like code gross salary not set. That's the magic number that gets returned when it's the default.
Right. So yes, I just decided if I get this code back, which I think if I look at it,
some negative number probably.
Yeah, it's negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so if I get that code back, then I know that it is the default value. Because if they look at it, if they open that preference and then they just hit OK, then that actually saves it, and then we considered it set, even if it's still the 26,695, and that's how we know whether or not the user set that or if that is just the default returning.
That makes sense. All right, so here's the notification. Again, I used the same approach that I did with the detection. So this is an abstract class. Everything is static function. And the reason why is because a lot of it is essentially creating things that you interact with the system service anyway. So it doesn't need to be, you should give it a context, and then you can retrieve things rather than being attached to a particular class. So for example, this is the base notification builder. So what this does, it looks very complicated, but let's just jump to the very end. That's the part that's important. So the builder, what it does is it sets the notification that gets pulled down, right? So I have multiple things. So the title is our name, the name of the app, which is Lunch In. And then set defaults is essentially what the notification will trigger. So it can trigger either the a blinking light, or a vibration, or a sound. So I just said, well, just trigger the default stuff. So I just want the light. And then I have two actions. One is the yes action and the no action. So the yes action, I use the yes icon, which looks like, well, okay, right now it's not compiled, so I cannot just jump to it. So it's a check mark. So it shows a check mark, and it shows the word yes, which is defined in the string. And then when you click on it, it will launch the yes pending intent, which is set here earlier. So what this set is say I will launch this activity with this action, and the action is passed in as a parameter because the builder is shared between lunch in and lunch out. And then if you click no, then by default it dismisses the notification. And in Android, it's kind of weird that if you want to dismiss a notification, you still have to give it an intent. If you give it just no instead of a real intent, it will do nothing. You click on it, nothing happens. So I have a notification receiver that all it does is just cancel the notification. I don't know why it has to be such a roundabout thing, but that's how it is right now. Right, so this notification returns a builder, which then the lunch in and lunch out can build on. So in the case of lunch out, for example, I get the builder and I give it the action lunch out, so that when we trigger the activity, it knows what to do with it. And then I will add a text that says going out for lunch. And then for the lunch in case, you say, do you stay for lunch? Right. So, and then I'll change the icons actually, now I could have moved it to the builder. Before, I had two different icons, but now we just use the bread notification for both, just to indicate it's from our app. And then I set the sound. So if it's a lunch out notification, then it makes wah, wah, wah sound, just for fun. The reason why I did that was actually for the demo. I thought it would be nice to have that. We ended up, when we shoot the video, we actually just added the sound post-processing, because we were filming downstairs outside on Pearl Street, and it was really loud, so no one can hear anything anyway. But that was the thought. that would be something that you know that, oh no, I went out for lunch, I shouldn't have, right? And then once the notification builder is set properly, I can call build to get a notification, and then I can call notify. So when notify is called, then the system, let me just show you quickly what this does. It just calls the manager and set the notification with a proper notification ID. And then what happens is the notification get called, and you can press on one of the actions, right? Yes or no. Both of them actually would just bring you right back to main activity, and it will I actually put it inside the Go fragment. So it will get you to the activity, but the part that was actually dealing with it is in the Go fragment, because that's what I changed the UI for. So if I get a lunch out notification, then the action, normally the action will be nothing when you are just launching the app from the icon. But if it's from the notification, then I will get this action, and then I can update the UI. And the reason why I'm setting it to null is so that when you come back to it, for some reason, maybe you went to take a phone call and you come back to it, and I only want to trigger it once. So it will update the lunch out UI, and what it does, it will tell the database that, hey, she lunched out, and then it will change the count in the database, and then we'll update the UI, and then we'll cancel the notification, meaning dismiss it, and then here we'll highlight the sacrifice progress. I'll go through it line by line. So in the update, what it does is it will go ahead and grab all these parameters and update the three things, which is the goal progress, like how much money you have saved over your goal, and then how much is remaining, and update the pie chart with the progress, which is just this math. And then I also update the money sacrificed part, which is computing the number of lunch hours. So this function just blindly updates everything. It doesn't like discriminate between whether you have just come in from a lunch in or lunch out, or you just open the app, because I need to update it when you open the app anyway. I need to talk to the database. So I was just being lazy instead of updating the part that I need, because it doesn't cost much, at least for now. I mean, we don't have like thousands of entries in the database. So right, so then if I go back, then I can show you then the highlight sacrifice progress. What it does is it changes the background of the money sacrifice line to be yellow. So when you come in, it updates, and then it also put a highlight in yellow. So that's the part of the UI that changed. And then one thing is special is the Go Rich dialog, which is when you come in with a lunch in and you hit the goal amount, it will show this fragment. And I thought it would be fun to show a little bit of what's happening here. So the goal fragment is the one that gets shown with the animation. I don't know how many of you actually saw the animation that I did. It was in the video. Maybe I should show the video. It would be fun. Let me see if I can do that. So I'm going to jump to the very end when Emery got her goal. Unless you want to watch the whole thing. It's kind of fun. Have you watched it?
Wow.
Yeah. Okay.
I saved enough money to get the watch.
So the animation was actually done by, we don't want to watch the FitCat toilet paper animation. So the animation was actually done by Joan. Like initially it was raining money, and then we decided that it's not good because it was crashing Superior's emulator because I was running out of memory. So what we did at the end was a single $sign, and I combined the two of the animation that you did. One is the rotation, and one is the size, the scale.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
So yeah, I put it basically what the $sign was. It was from 180 degrees back to 360, so it becomes bigger. And the way that it works is that, let's see if I can find my animation. Yeah, the dollar animation. So it's an animation set that I put together. So both of them are running at the same time. So it scales from half size to full size. And then it rotates from 180 to 360 pivoted in the middle, just because I thought it looks nice. So I put two together. And then it also has a little bit of trickery in the sense that in the beginning, there's nothing on that dialogue and just the dollars turning. And then after the animation is done, I make the title and the name and the cost visible. So I say, go rich, and then it says, vacation, $200 or something like that. So in the beginning, all you see is the animation and then the rest come in. And the way that works is I set a listener to the animation. So when the animation ends, then I go ahead and fade in the views. Cool. So yeah, so I think that's all. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the browser. I'm so tempted to watch the animation again, but I won't.
Show us the animation again, because I didn't
see?
All that. I didn't get it all out of it.
Yeah, I just have to show the animation by request.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that you combined two.
All right, so here it is.
Wow, I saved enough money to get the watch.
So you see how in the beginning there is no words, and then it will have to watch it again. And then it come after, it fade in after the animation is done. It's just, I'm fascinated by it. So I just have to keep
I
watching
saved
it.
enough money to get the watch.
So I think this ended up being a really nice project that touched on a lot of different parts of Android, how they like call each other, and like we have broadcast receiver, we have the notification. I don't know, we didn't use a service, did we?
No,
Probably not.
We initially were going to.
Yeah, and then we have the database, we have settings, we have custom view, test. Yeah, exactly. So it ended up working out really well. I couldn't have planned it. So thanks, Hackathon.